Oh, yay! Welcome, dear listeners. Today is always a special time when we do this, but today is really very special. I'm sitting down with newfound friend, and as it turns out, a friend who already shares a lot of people, gorgeous people with myself. So I was just talking to the beautiful Natalie, who is here with me this morning, and we found out that we have quite a few people in common already. And I feel like as we go weeks, months into our friendship, we discover yet another person who somehow is a friend of ours, who is a link, who is a bridge between us. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to intro you properly now, Natalie, because the world deserves to know who you are, what you do, and why I ask you to come today. So Natalie Benmayor is the founder and creative director of Capsule 11, a spiritual high fashion jewelry brand inspired by her British Egyptian heritage. Merging ancient Egyptian symbolism with futuristic modern luxury, Capsule 11 creates genderless jewelry sustainably crafted in recycled metals. Its amulets have been worn by cultural icons including Grimes at the Met Gala, Muse, Tyler, Baby Rexha, Georgia Smith, and Rita Ora, while Capsule 11 jewelry has also featured on the catwalk for fellow designer Sarah Regensberger. Media feature include Forbes, Vogue, Elle, Numero, Dazed, Wonderland, and Natalie was also named one of the 20 Voices of Change by the Responsible Jewelry Council in 2025. Natalie is also a TEDx speaker and was named Pantone Spotlight Artist of the Year 2025, with Capsule 11 becoming the first jewelry brand to collaborate with Pantone. The brand has since expanded into immersive experiences, including the signature tarot to talisman concept at Soho House and floating sound baths collaborations with One and Only, Royal Mirage, with Beyond Wellness, and Soho House 180. Welcome to the podcast, Natalie. Wonderful to have you. And did I just see the cat? Is this a cat?
Oh, Tarot just decided to join us.
Of course, because, dear listeners out there, as I was reading up, I just saw the screen went black and fluffy.
And it was a black cat.
Oh, just so perfect. And, when a black cat crosses the road and all of that, for me, It means good luck. So for me, I'm just super excited to be here with you today. I want to quickly tell listeners how you and I met. So I was running a sound bath at 180 Soho House, London. And one of the women that came to that went over to me afterwards and we had a quick chat and she looked at me and she said, "Do you know Natalie?" And I was like, "Natalie who? But no, but I would love to know Natalie." And she said, "I'll put you two in touch. I think you will get on so well." Little to say that not only did we get on so well that I immediately asked Natalie if she wanted to join me on the next sound bath with her gorgeous jewelry. You've now very soon become like a big part of my life. So yeah, thank you so much for being here today, Natalie, and looking forward to hearing your story.
Thank you.
Amazing. So Natalie, I always ask people to go back in time so we can really understand who you are today, from the understanding from where you came from, the bones that you sit in today, the wisdom that you sit in today. So take us back in time, where were you born, and to what kind of family, what kind of tapestry were you woven into?
So I was born in Harrow, so just outside London, but I moved to Devon when I was 5. So I actually grew up in the countryside. I was a bit of a black sheep of the family because a lot of them are in kind of finance and lawyers and everything like that, or teaching, not really like creatives in like the immediate family. But I drew since I could pick up a pencil. I think I won my first drawing competition when I was 5. And I was obsessed with fashion and dressing up, and there was no fashion in Devon. I was probably like one of the only people I knew interested in it when I was growing up. But I was always trying to find things and go to vintage shops or catalogs because there was nothing in the shops, in like the main shops. So I ended up kind of like combining the two. And I think from an early teen, I discovered Vivienne Westwood. I did a project on her when I was like 12 or something, and it kind of like grew from there. I was lucky enough to get an art scholarship to Exeter School, which was renowned for art. I had an absolutely incredible award-winning teacher, which really helped to kind of like create my path there. And I did a sort of mixture of like fashion, sculpture, and art. But I definitely knew that I wanted to do fashion, I think, from that point. So I started to integrate like soft sculpture and fashion photography, and then ended up learning proper fashion at Exeter College when I did my foundation year. Then I was lucky enough to get into Kingston Uni, which was fantastic for a fashion degree. And they were known for like really setting you up for industry, like teaching you the necessary skills. So then I finally moved back to London, which I wanted to do because obviously the possibility for fashion and inspiration is much greater than in the countryside. And I absolutely loved the fashion degree. I actually started in clothing, and then I very quickly became interested in surface, embroidery. And by the end of like the third year, when I was doing my graduate collection, like my entire collection was hand embroidered. So it was sort of jewelry like. And I ended up coming third in the Hands and Lock International Embroidery Prize. And I was lucky enough to meet Francois Lesage before he died, which was the famous Chanel couturier, such an inspiring person, who presented me with the award. And I think the teachers were like, I think you do really well in accessories. I started my first job on the high street. It was actually at Karen Millen, and I helped create their first jewelry line.
Oh,
But also when I was at uni, I did a work placement at Michiko Kashino. That's actually where I learned to hand make jewelry. And I trained under who's still a friend of mine, Georgia Watson in Portobello. And I helped make jewelry for the Michiko Kashino fashion show. And I was like, I definitely want to do this.
oh my God. Okay, I'm gonna stop you for a moment because it's
Yeah.
it's so juicy and I don't want us to miss out.
Mhm.
But first and foremost, just yay. So gorgeous to hear this. And because it's, like your passion is just pouring out of you as I'm listening. And I think, so often as a human being, we can have a passion for something, we can have a light and a brightness, something that just naturally lights us up.
Mhm.
But so often it can get blocked, right? Whether because well-meaning parents, mentors, whatever, somehow dims that, or because we don't believe in ourselves or whatever it is. But to hear you, to remember, you remember everything in such great detail and so chronologically, which is incredible. It's wonderful. But I want to ask you, before we go any further, Natalie,
Mhm.
do you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I've got a sister,
Is she younger or older than you?
younger.
Younger. And because I remember you said you won your first drawing competition or something at the age of 5. Did your parents and your family always support what you wanted to do? And because it sounds like you and I are really similar. It sounds like you were so driven
Yeah,
since you were a kid. You were like, this is
yeah,
who I am, and I'm just going to
yeah,
create this thing. Because I
yeah,
get this kind of almost like this is wrong because it doesn't sound poetic, but this bulldozer
yeah.
energy. It's just like we're here, we're doing it,
Absolutely.
it's happening. And so your parents, your family were supportive of this.
Yeah, I'm very lucky. Even though it wasn't what they did, they were very supportive because I kept winning awards. So I think they were like, okay, it's feasible to make a career out of it. I think obviously if I hadn't, it would have been fair enough. Like they know it's a hard path. So I think maybe they'd have been a bit more dubious. But I think as I sort of continued to sort of excel, and obviously I got in at one of the better unis, they were kind of sure that it would go the right way, and at least to go kind of like let me give it a shot.
I love that. And but also like you said, the fact that I mean I've been to Devon, it's so beautiful, right? But the fact that you grew up in Devon, which is absolutely not Mecca of
No
fashion, right?
fashion. Well,
and
there wasn't then. I think slightly more now. But
mm,
when I was there, there was really, like there wasn't very much at all. The most premium store was a House of Fraser, which I worked in. And they had like some of the designer brands and they had like a few things, but like there was nothing edgy.
I
It was
absolutely
commercial fashion, even if there was fashion and brands, there was nothing edgy. There was no street style, like there was nobody wearing, anything. Yeah.
100%. And I think it's such an important point to make here because it means that although you grew up with a family that supported what you did and although you knew what you wanted to do and there was no stopping you and although you were obviously very talented at it because you kept winning awards
Mhm.
and all of that, but still you grew up in an environment that was nothing but, but fashion. And so the fact, even as a child, when we so want to belong, especially as
Yes.
humans and little kids, for me, it just says so much about you and your personality. And that's why I just wanted to pause and just really get that in there, because it's all great having a dream. It's all great being good at it. It's all great having talent and being disciplined and all of that. But on top of that, being in an environment that wasn't naturally conducive to, as in, all the other people, the other
Yeah.
kids, everyone that was a peer, a friend of yours wouldn't have been doing what you were doing. That takes some real balls. I keep having these bizarre words in my head this morning, bulldozer, balls, but there's just this like, wow, energy, which I love. So anyway, here you are, you managed to make it to London. What happens next? Let's take you back in time, well, forward, but, back.
Yeah, so I started at Kingston Uni, which, I absolutely loved. It took me like a minute, I think, to find my feet, like adjusting, like for sure. And I think even my style started to evolve and I was like, wow, there's all this inspiration, which was so exciting. And like everyone was dressing differently. It was fantastic, like the amount of inspiration that was like available, and even the going out and seeing what people were wearing and everything was like absolutely fantastic. So no, I really, really loved my degree. And as I said, I definitely gravitated towards the surface design as opposed to like the tailoring or like anything like that. I was okay at that, but I wouldn't say I would have excelled at it, but I loved surface. And like I was absolutely in love with old Schiaparelli. So when I did my graduate collection, I was inspired by the Alfred Hitchcock film Spellbound, and it was the Dali dream sequence. And it had all these eyes and drapes, and I just loved the surrealists and Schiaparelli and everything like that. I thought that was like incredibly beautiful. So that was kind of the inspiration for the collection. So I did all these hand embroidery, like I made eyes as pockets and they were dripping with fringing. And I loved all the Prada, and like I loved the old Moschino and how they very cleverly kind of like wove stuff in. And although I was designing surface, I think how I've evolved with jewelry, it's like it's not just plunked on. For example, the eye became the pocket, or the eye was the button that opened the piece, like it had a function. I love this idea of like functioning. And I actually got sponsored by a taxidermist, and I put glass eyes like in the work, like hidden in the smocking, which was this very traditional kind of, Victorian thing, or the smocking. And you did this kind of like double take. And I taught myself hand embroidery. It was incredibly time consuming, but as I said, I went on to be third in the world for hand embroidery. I think it was 36 countries like entered this Hand and Lock prize. So Hand and Lock's this incredible place which really champions like hand embroidery. They do a lot of stuff for the military and the royals and like everything like that. So to get third place when I wasn't an actual textile student was like a real moment. And obviously meeting Francois Lesage was just incredible. Like I couldn't believe I was meeting him. I felt very, very lucky. And I got a first for my collection as well. Um, and then, as I said, my first job was at Karen Millen. It was actually an ex-student of Kingston said they were looking for somebody, and I got recommended. And I was very lucky that I got a job 2 weeks out. I mean, it's always been hard to get a job in fashion, but it was, I have to say, there was more jobs on the ground then than now. So I think I was lucky to kind of get into the industry at the time when I did. And I learned a lot at Karen Millen. The quality of it was great. And as I said, I went on to be their first jewelry designer, kind of working along under the head of accessories. And I realized this is really what I want to do. And then from there, a position opened up at River Island, and they'd never had a jewelry designer before. It was always just bought in. So I was River Island's first jewelry designer, and it was at a time where like the high street was booming for jewelry. I don't know if you remember all that big festival jewelry that was on trends with like the body jewelry and the feathers and this. And like, anyway, I remember doing all those massive statement pieces, and when it was like fashionable to have the big statement necklace. So it was a really, really fun time. But I think also what was really life-changing for me was the amount of travel that I got to do. I went to like India 3 times a year, which I fell in love with like immediately, and I still kind of work with to this day. Incredible, incredible craftsmen. And obviously, they've got such a rich heritage in jewelry, and it's such an inspiring place for like colors and sounds and just everything. And I got to go to China to learn, how to work from their factories. And I think that's when I really like learned how to design jewelry properly. But I kind of made it up as I went along, to be honest. I just found my own way with it. And, we got to go on lots of inspiration trips. So I think it really opened my eyes to like the world of manufacture. So that was a really big jump when I went there. It was like a huge success, and I think I over doubled profits like very quickly. Like during my time there, we became like very, very known for jewelry. It was a huge, huge success. And then from there, I worked for a supplier for like loads of different brands, like including like the Intertex group. And that was great because the head office was actually in Hong Kong. So I got to spend a lot of time in Asia. So I used to go to Asia for like 3.5 weeks at a time. And I absolutely fell in love with the street style. So I think that had a really huge bearing on my work as well. I think particularly the men in Asia, the way they dress and the way they wear jewelry is incredible.
Absolutely. So I've been to Japan a few times, and I remember the first time I went, and this would have been like, I mean, I'm trying to remember, probably 2000 and 2008 or something. I
Yeah.
remember looking at the men. I mean, I love just people watching, right? But I remember sitting with my friend. We were on tour. We were actually dancing for Miss Universe. But anyway, that aside, we were sitting there, me and my friend, and we were watching. Instead of watching the women, we started watching all the men because, like you said, the way they dressed in Japan, all the men, compared to what we did witnessed here in Europe, was so fascinating. I absolutely loved it. And I also came back here feeling like a bit sorry for the guys in England,
Yeah.
compared to what's possible there. So I love that you say that as well, that really inspired you, the street style for men in Asia as well. Yeah, amazing. Continue, my love. Yeah.
Yeah, so I found that really inspiring. I got to go to Hong Kong, I got to go to Shanghai, I got to go to Korea. So that was like, yeah, amazing and the style out there is very clean, which I loved. It's almost futuristic. I really, really liked that. And then I went on to, and it was, what was really interesting. So I got made redundant there, which was every time I've been made redundant, which is twice, it's been like the best thing that's kind of like happened to me. And I was starting to go around all the job agencies, and I got put up for a job at like a big designer brand, but they wouldn't look at me because of my CV, my high street CV. So I became to learn, which I wish someone had warned me, you can't get into high ends once you've worked on the high street. So I was like, I'm going to have to do it for myself. So I started to create a potential collection. And then during when I was creating that collection, I suddenly got a job for Accessorize, which I took because obviously it was a fantastic job. But like while I was there, I ended up launching a brand with an ex-business partner, which was like my first fashion brand. Which unfortunately I kind of had to come out of because the relationship didn't survive. Sometimes it's kind of like that, but it was like a learning experience. And then I briefly went to Lola Rose, which was a crystal brand, which was a founder-led crystal brand, like before COVID. And then, like so many people, I got made redundant in COVID. But again, best thing that had happened to me because I'd already come up with a concept of like another brand that I wanted to do solo in kind of just jewelry. So this kind of takes me to the point I came up with Capsule 11 during the pandemic. Uh,
Wow. So in the deepest, darkest, you know, time of the whole planet, not just in your own personal life, but on the whole planet,
yeah.
Capsule 11 was born.
Yeah.
I love that. So tell us more about that. How did that, I mean, it's never just one experience or one moment in time, right? But do you remember one of the first moments where the concept really became clear to you?
Yes, no, absolutely. When I wanted to do the concept was actually when I came out of the previous brands, my mental health suffered a lot. I was probably the lowest I've ever been. I was absolutely rock bottom. And I've always been a spiritual person, and actually the growing up in Devon, sort of going right back to that. I would say I was into like crystals and, fascinated with things from like other realms and all sorts of things from a very kind of like young teen, and tarot and like everything like that from a really young teen. And that was really big in Devon. So I would say, although fashion wasn't big, there's this other part of me where what it was big in Devon. So lots of people were into that. And also it was the 90s. So there's this whole trend around the craft and like everything like that. So I'd always had a kind of fascination with crystals. And I tried lots of different things for my mental health, like including hypnotherapy. That didn't work at all. Like traditional psychotherapy wasn't really working. And I decided to try crystal and Reiki healing for the first time. And I really felt a shift. I felt this whole like weight lift, and I was like, okay, great. Like something feels like it's working. And my Reiki healer, Ria Ravani, who's a very close friend of mine now, yeah, she was like, you should wear this crystal and that crystal. Like, that's what's going to really, like, that's what your body's really needing right now. And I was like, nobody makes an amulet for the modern day where you can interchange crystals depending on the energy you seek. And I essentially designed it in my head, like there and then. I was like, I need to create that because you get those funny ones with like the spiral wire, but it's all a bit hippie-ish and not very chic. And I was like, nobody does anything modern. And me kind of like having Egyptian heritage and, they believed in the power of amulets and beauty and crystal healing like so strongly. I was like, how do we make this for the modern woman or man?
Hmm.
So that's where I actually first came up with the idea. But then during the pandemic, I was like, when I look at trend, and I'm someone who worked on the high street, so I've done every single trend there's ever been, and probably ever will be, because they just repeat, basically. They just repeat. And when I look at trend for my own brand, I don't look at trend as in like, oh, is it chokers? Is it this? Is it that? Or whatever. I look at global trends. I think that's a lot more powerful. And I'm like, what are people really seeking now? And I have a very evocative family story. So my family were Egyptian Jewish, so they were exiled in the 50s for their religion. And the only thing that they smuggled out was a box of jewellery. And they took it to London and it got locked up in a vault, which interestingly was used for James Bond Goldfinger to represent Fort Knox. And the vault was suddenly shutting about 20 years ago or so now, it must have been. And the vault became the Ned London, the cocktail bar in the Ned. And we went in and it was a turnstile and two keys. And we pulled out this box of jewelry. And I was like, wow, this is a family time capsule. And it was such a powerful moment. I was like, out of anything in the world, this is what they've taken as a reminder of home, a reminder of their heritage, like what's important to them, something to carry like a legacy. And it was like, yeah, it was so powerful. And I was like, what would I put in a time capsule now in the pandemic to be rediscovered in the future that I think people want? And it's good energy, it's empowerment, it's meaning beyond design, it's sustainability, it's inclusivity, it's like all these elements. And that was essentially the basis for Capsule 11 because the trends at the time was all this joyful plastic jewelry. And I know for a fact, having worked on the high street, that these trends come and go in a second and they're copied for £2, then it's gone. So it's like I wanted to create something that really transcended trends and really tapped into like what people were like looking for on like more of a personal, deeper level that wasn't trend led, but it was fashionable. So I was like, what would one of the big brands do? Like, what happens if Givenchy or YSL, if they did spiritual jewelry, what would that look like? It would be more polished, it would be this. So it was those kind of philosophies that I put into the brands. And then the first piece, which is still my favorite piece or favorite range, is the capsule crystal amulets, where, yeah, you basically open them and you interchange the stones. But they're capsule shaped, which also plays into this concept of spiritual futurism. So, spiritual futurism is, I mean, what is that, right? So, I look at spirituality like really broadly, and it's something that goes beyond religion. I think a lot more people now, dramatically, a lot more people are identifying as spiritual, but not necessarily religious, because, we have a hope, we have a faith in a higher power. So I was like, what's that going to look like in the future in terms of visual genres? Like, you always think about spiritual jewelry traditionally as bohemian, but I'm like, what if it had a futuristic, powerful, clean aesthetic? And I think like the more spirituality grows, the more visual genres are going to open up. And I'm like, I love spiritual bohemian jewelry, but so many people have done it, like nobody needs another one. So I think if you give something a new physical face, you just open up the proportion of people that can potentially wear it. I'm like, what, how would the woman in the power suit wear it, Like, how would the really chic person wear it that's like more in the city, but they need a dose of healing or spirituality, right? Rather than the person which is like, on their retreat. So I think that was a really interesting way of looking at kind of creating a brand. And that was essentially how I started it. And like every single symbol is kind of inspired by ancient Egypt. And I think, it's like we take so much inspiration now from the ancients. They were so ahead of their time. Like I always say, the Egyptians were futurists because what they created was like, by anybody's standards, was so, so, so ahead in terms of technology and the way they thought and like the beauty they invented and like everything like that. And obviously jewelry was such a big part of their culture, but it had a function, to ward stuff
Yes.
off or to draw stuff in. And I find that really fascinating that the amulet, like, whether people believe in the power of an amulet or not, I think you have to give anything credit that has survived, whether that's a
Mm.
practice or a song or an instrument or a like whatever it is, or a style of clothing, like whatever, or like a medical practice, anything that endures is like there's a reason for that. And I think the amulet, if you think about jewelry, has endured for, centuries.
I
And we're
really
still using amulets now in a really similar way to what the ancients did. And I love that. That's one of the reasons that I love them. It's still talismans are relevant today.
absolutely incredible. And what a powerful story. And this concept of can I create something that will outlive me?
Yes, correct.
Fully knowing that it will, not
Yes,
if, not potentially, this will outlive me, and
yes.
I'm totally okay with that. In fact,
Yeah.
I love that. I think this is, I mean, on all levels, your story is so powerful, Natalie, and that's also why, I'm so excited that you're here today, sharing it in depth. But I think especially in this day and age where everything is so disposable, everything
Yeah.
is so quick, like,
Yeah.
and the tendency on, for the level of humanity, like, can we have it quicker, faster, 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 right?
Yeah.
And so to create something that actually, not only is it meant to last, it is meant, built, created to outlive us. Oh,
Yes.
how beautiful. You
I
know,
think that's really beautiful. Yeah.
I really loved it. And also the fact that the way that, your whole family story, going to now the net, but
Mhm.
picking up, that old box that, that your family, that was the only thing they took with them when they had to flee their own country, right? Their own home. And to open that up, and I'm getting goosebumps just imagining that moment when you were all there together, and you knew that they looked around their home and they were like, this is what we're bringing.
Yeah.
And whether or not they knew that their ancestors one day would be
Yeah.
opening or able to open it,
Mhm.
so many goosebumps it's just the story is not, it's not even touching, it's just eye opening, heart awakening,
Yeah.
soul healing. It is absolutely beautiful.
Mhm.
And the fact that, again, thank you for your honesty and openness and sharing that Capsule 11 was born out not just of your own depth and your own, transition, transformation, but also it was born out of the deepest, darkest space
Yes.
that humanity has been going through for a
Correct.
really long time
Yes.
on a collective level. It wasn't just
Yeah.
England, it wasn't just your story, it wasn't just your family, on a collective
Mhm.
level. And again, that thing of like, the most beautiful things can be created out of the darkest, out of pain, right?
Absolutely.
So, oh, yay, my love. Let's continue. How beautiful. So this was the initiation, the awakening of not just you, but also Capsule 11, right? Because we're always in relationship. Fantastic. So then, okay, you had the concept, you started to draw, I'm assuming. What happened next?
So, yeah, as I said, one good thing about the pandemic was like when you start a brand or like anything you're starting as a founder, it's like the sacrifice, like normally, because you have to put in serious hours. There's no way around it, right? And I would say because I was in lockdown, it was actually a bit of a gift. I worked 15-hour days because there was nothing else to do in the best possible way. I went hard. And when I set my mind to something, I'm like, I have to launch by Christmas because if I don't, I miss Christmas. And we all know that Christmas is like whatever. So I went from concept to launch in 7 months of a luxury brand, which is crazy. And if I had to do a job during that time, there's no way I could have done it because when I did my previous strand, it was all done in just evenings and weekends. So it's possible, but it's slower. But I just had uninterrupted days and I just went hard and I just had, just went forwards with it. And I just had an absolute belief. I put all my redundancy money in it. I put my savings into it. I took like a consultancy job to like buffer that back up. But I basically just put everything on the line. I was like, this is it. It has to work.
Oh my God, I
And
love
I
that. And
did
was this, you wanted it to launch? Was that
for
Christmas
Christmas 2020.
2020?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is wild because, okay, my book, one of my books is actually holding and supporting the screen right now. But although I didn't, I didn't create a jewelry brand, I decided to write my first book during 2020 and I had the same idea. All of a sudden I was like, it must be launched before
Yeah.
Christmas. And so I did a similar thing. And so I just wanted to share that this is another synchronicity between you and I, because,
So interesting.
right. So anyway, okay, back to you. Fantastic.
Yeah, so this is interesting. So one of my favorite pieces as well that I created as a brand. So I never saw it. I knew what angel numbers were, but I didn't really see them anywhere. And for some reason, I started seeing 1111 everywhere when I was creating the brand. And I was like, you know what? I think this has to be a piece. And I was like, how do I make it cool? Like, I don't want to just engrave a disc. It's so boring. So I did these sort of cut out 1111 letters. And I thought to myself, you know what? This is either going to sink or swim. It's not going to be, And anyway, I made the piece. And funnily enough, so my previous brand had been on Farfetch. So I had a contact at Farfetch. And I approached Farfetch on the 11th of November, so 11/11 in 2020, and they said yes in 1 hour, which never
Yes.
happens. That's nuts. A buyer saying yes in 1 hour. Like, come on. And I was like, wow, this is really, really interesting. And I've met some amazing people through 11/11. So, like, actually, I think within 2 weeks of launching the Instagram, so I launched the brand on Farfetch, which was a dream. Um, and I think within 2 weeks, I only had a couple of hundred followers. I got a DM from Vex King, which was crazy. He was like Mr. Manifesting. He's absolutely lovely. And he discovered me because of the 11/11. And I ended up giving him a piece and it sold out. And I was like, wow, this is like crazy. It was amazing. Like that I managed to reach somebody who was that big when I had 200 followers and I just launched a brand. So really magical things did happen like very, very quickly. I was very, very lucky. I took a job at ASOS in parallel because it's obviously you don't start making money immediately, like needless to say. It was actually a full-time job, like running in parallel for like the first year, doing men's and their reclaimed vintage line, which I really enjoyed. And yeah, we did really well with press from the off. I didn't really have any PR experience, but I think we got a Numero magazine full feature within a couple of weeks, like a full write-up. I was in Forbes within 3 months, as people just loved the concept. It was all genderless as well. Again, I grew up with a Mediterranean dad that wore jewelry. Like, it's such a cultural thing. My dad wore a ring and a bracelet and all these kind of things, which I love. Like, I was actually inspired by his signet ring from the 70s for one of my key pieces. And yeah, it was amazing. And it was, I think it was about 6 or 7 months in. one person, because I think mood boards are like manifesting. So the person that I saw as this kind of like modern spiritual icon was Grimes. So I looked up who her stylist was and I DM'd her, and she replied to me and loved the work. And then 6 months later, she called in for the Met Gala. So that was just like crazy, like having my ring worn by an Iris Van Herpen dress and a sword and everything like that. I think that will be hard to beat probably for my whole career. I would say like that's going to be one of my top few moments because the outfit was so iconic. Styled by Christina Turner, like so such a talented stylist. I'm so grateful to this kind of like day. But I would say that was like the first kind of breakthrough in terms of celebrity. And I've been very, very fortunate that since that point, I've never had to chase press. You know, it's kind of like naturally come. I think if you get somebody who's very aligned at the beginning, things do tend to like happen like a lot easier and a lot quicker. So that was like a fantastic moment. But, you know, as the brand evolved, like since COVID, the economy's got even more challenging. I think we thought that was as bad as it was going to get, and it sadly hasn't. So I think like as things have gone along, there have been a lot of challenges, and I think you really have to adapt. It's like the traditional wholesale model has really like fallen through. Like that used to be the way to grow. It's something that I tried and really didn't have the success with because I think the time I tried to do it, it's like the Russian war hit, then the other war hit, and it was just this kind of like, I think it's a blessing and a curse being a really unique brand. I think like in terms of like press and PR and celebrity placements, it's been like a huge asset to be really unique. But I would say in terms of like, when buyers are like nervous, it's unfortunately been, too challenging to go down that route. So maybe in the past where people would have taken more of a risk on, smaller brands that are a bit more niche, I think that's become harder and harder and harder, which I completely understand. But I think everything happens for a reason. And I think that, other routes have now opened up to me, which I am actually a lot more aligned with. So it's like, although that was maybe disappointing at one point, I would say that I've actually been grateful for it now because it's taken me down a path that I was more meant to go down. So, yeah.
100%. And I also think, the word that you keep using, and I don't know if you've thought about it yourself, but so the word aligned, if you were going to turn that into a symbol, at least for me, it would be 11.
Mm-hmm.
Because the one aligns with another one, and the two
Yeah.
of them creates magic. They create 11, right? But they're both independent ones that attract one another, and then they're creating a third energy, which then is that alignment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also, I just want to add in here because again, it's important why you and I met, why we chose this, why we're here today.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I told you when we first met, Natalie, but in numerology, I'm 1111. So I think this is another fun little fact. And especially, I'm not trying to convince anyone out there. No one needs to have the beliefs I have or you have, but it's still beautiful, right? That there is an energetic code behind everything and everyone that we interact with. So going back to you, this thing of, and I also love that you said this because again, we live in a time and age, especially very young people, they can have this impression, this idea that, if something doesn't happen right away, it's just not for them, right? Whereas this thing of like you said, I worked 15 hours days. There is no way of getting around it, right? And it's the same thing with me. I always say, find something that you love, that you're obsessed with, something where you have to, because again, so look at your own journey, right? There's been high highs, but there's also been low lows because this is life, right?
Yeah.
This is life. And so we have to, and I think this is just such an important part because again, it's not just that you're talented, you're really good, you're really intelligent, really hardworking, all of that. You love what you do. You are fully aligned and fully devoted to what you do. And whether it's Capsule 11 or whatever happens from there onwards, you will always follow that path, which I just think is a really important note to have so that listeners out there are not just like, oh yeah, Natalie's really good and that's why she's lucky. I'm like, no, she's not lucky. This is alignment. The key is alignment, but alignment only comes if you've had the courage to go deep within your own self and discovered what lies below in hidden side. So yeah, back to you, gorgeous. So my love, Can you tell us more and also tell us about this Pen 10 TEDx thing?
Yeah, I
Yes,
will.
talk to
So
us.
I started to, yeah, as I said, I started to kind of look at obviously like other things. And I think like collaborations and events and doing more stuff publicly was where I'm kind of more closely like aligned. So yeah, the TEDx talk was amazing. As I said, I have a fascination with kind of like space as well, which again plays into kind of what we leave behind. So I did a TEDx talk called "What Would You Put in Your Time Capsule to Space?" So it was inspired by the family story. And it's basically saying that all of us right now are going to be the ancients of the future. And when you look at like the ancients, it's like we learn from the ancients. So what we leave behind is actually going to become a tool of learning and history. And it basically tells people what was important to us. So what we leave behind is going to be the foundations for the next civilizations. That's fact. And obviously physical things that last the test of time, so they're made in certain materials are going to last, but it's also the things that have sentimental value to people. So, for example, in the box, some things, of course, they were solid gold, it's Egyptian, some things weren't, but it still had value to them, it was sentimental. So it can be either two categories, which I think is really interesting, but that's really the only things which will survive. Because things which aren't very made very well aren't going to survive by default. And if it's very throwaway and fleeting, again, nobody really cares to look after it. So I think the more meaning that you put into products, I think people, it becomes part of their personal story. And that's one of the things I love about jewelry so much. We wear it every day, whereas we might not wear like the same dress every day, but we might potentially wear the same amulet or the same ring every day. I mean, people do like look at a wedding ring, you wear it every day, or an engagement ring. There's a reason it has longevity because it's attached to something that you chose to do as like a beautiful memory. So when you get boxes of treasures, there's always engagement rings and wedding rings in there because that was really important to somebody. Like I wear my great grandmother's every day from the box, stacked with my modern pieces. So I think this concept about, yeah, like what we leave behind, it's like, and I think as artists which create stuff, we do have the responsibility because we're given that gift to create stuff. So I think it's not just about what you consume, it's about what you create. And obviously, we've been given this gift and ability to create these things, which are essentially going to be part of history.
I
And
love that.
obviously, like without a doubt, let's face it, AI is one of the biggest things which has happened to our generation. But the thing with technology is you've got no guarantee of its survival. It's kind of like technology moves on, and we don't necessarily know that those things are going to be able to be played in the future. They might, but they might not. But obviously, we know for a fact physical things are. So it's like there's all these things which are existing of us in the digital realm. But it's like, for example, I always think, well, what if like Instagram just got deleted? Like, we don't have control over that. You know what I mean? So if you've got these things just existing in digital form, then like if that gets deleted, that's essentially wiped out. Whereas what you leave kind of like in the physical realm, like in the physical space, we know that more for a fact. Whereas technology, it's just not guaranteed. And I think that's kind of like really interesting that obviously like historically those things we kind of like learn from because they're physical. And I think when things are physical as well, and that's why I like working with crystals, like they have an energy to them. They're from the earth.
Oh my God, yes. I was lying on my bed yesterday doing this meditation with like 10 crystals on top of me.
Yeah.
And the words that kept coming from the crystals to me were, we are nature and you
Yeah,
are
they're
nature.
nature.
And so again, when people are like, oh, I don't believe in this and that, I'm like,
Yeah.
it's nature.
It's
You are
nature.
nature.
Yeah.
Of course it's gonna, and it's such a, going back to your jewelry, it's a really simple and yet profound way to help ground yourself back into the
Exactly.
body and back into the earth.
Yeah.
Having something that's tangible,
Yeah.
something you can touch, you can feel the
Exactly.
weight of, the color, all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was so powerful. And I also just want to share this thing which I love about you, where you said, this is the gift that we have as artists, we get to create. But what you said also is, I know you didn't say that word, but I know that's what you meant. With that great gift comes great
Yeah,
responsibility.
I agree.
And I loved it. And I know that's exactly what you live by. And I just want to share that because I think this is one thing, Natalie, that really sets you aside from a lot of other people. Not saying you're better or worse, whatever, but this is something that for me is so aligned with everything that I believe in. And that's a huge thing, which I think a lot of the time people don't think about. They think about art or artists or creative people, like sometimes these amazing beings, but they don't always hold that same kind of gravity to them, but you
Yeah.
do. With great gifts comes great responsibility. With great wisdom comes great responsibility. And you hold that and share that so beautifully.
Thank you. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think like, so that takes me on to Pantone. So it's funny with journeys, right? So I ended up meeting so it was actually a friend's wedding. So actually this is another thing about me. I don't like this term networking.
Me neither.
I,
I hate it.
you know why? It just sounds so transactional. And I really don't like it. I've never liked it. And I've realized more and more I don't like it. Because what I just believe in, like with my whole heart, is if you're passionate about what you do, if you go out in the world and you exist authentically, things will come. And you do have to go out there in the world. Like when I, teach, which I've done on panels and stuff at LCF, I'm like the soft skills needed for fashion are huge and they're so important. You can be like the next McQueen, but if you're sat at home, nobody's going to find you. So it's so important. And I don't mean you have to party hard. It's not that. It's like just go the places that inspire you and you will meet the right people just like naturally. And for me, I've stuck by that. Like, obviously, I have done, as I've mentioned, some sort of like cold outreach on Instagram and stuff like that, of course. But I would say 90% of my opportunities have come from meeting in person naturally, and I've not been seeking it.
Exactly. I'm the same. Yeah, 100%.
And Pantone came about because I was at a dear friend's wedding in Italy, and I remember like I saw this guy and he looked like a walking concept store, and I was like, we're definitely going to be friends. You're so interesting. And we just got talking, and he happened to be Pantone's head of marketing, and he was from New York. And when I was there, funnily enough, trying to get into wholesale and doing a wholesale show, which was extremely unsuccessful, he brought along the president of Pantone to meet me. So she really loved what I did. And, they didn't mention, although they knew the color at the time, obviously they knew what they were doing with the color. And there's this amazing woman, Laurie Pressman, who is the person who comes up with the color of the year every year and looks at global trends. So it's really interesting how they do it. And obviously that was Mocha Mousse, the year I collaborated with them. So Mocha Mousse, like they'd never done a brown neutral before. And it was all about grounding. It was about quiet luxury. It was about being nurturing, again, because it was off the back of these times where people like really needed that. So it really aligned with my work with crystals because actually crystal therapy and color therapy are extremely similar. Like the crystal looks like the thing that it does. For example, take smoky quartz or a bit mocha mousse. That's for grounding. Citrine is yellow, it's for joy. Rose quartz is pink, it's for love. So even if people don't think they believe in the meaning of crystals, people believe in color. Like subconsciously, you wear a certain color for a reason, and they're associated with different emotions. So I find that really interesting. And I worked with Pantone. That's a lot of the thing that fascinated me about working with them and actually how close the relationship between color and crystals was and the emotion it creates for people is really, really interesting. So I was asked to create a jewelry line for Pantone. To kind of like launch at their Color of the Year event, which they have every year, which they have themed around the color, which was fantastic. So I dyed cords in the color, but I also worked with like agates, which was kind of like brown and of course like very grounding, and it's used to hold in meditation. And I use like our eye clip as one of our kind of more signature pieces as well. So it's this clip which opens. So it's literally a metaphor for the third eye opening, which is really interesting. And it's a universal symbol of protection. So I used that within it, and it had a quartz stone in the middle that was dyed in the color of the year and the other kind of neighboring palettes. And for the VIPs, we had these kind of like clip off like agate stones. So that was just an incredible experience. And again, it's such a small brand, the fact they took me on to work with, I was just so grateful. And, I was sort of flown out to New York. And, we were told that our customization station was more popular than the bar. I was like, that's one of my best compliments as an event.
I love that. And I just want to briefly, again, just because this is a highlight, you're at that wedding in Italy and you see this man. And what did you say? I loved it. You said he looked like a
A
walking
walking concept store.
concept store, right?
Like every item I was like, I don't know what brand it is, but I'm like, you just look amazing. The best aftershave, the coolest glasses. And again, that was just like, I had no idea who he was. It's just like, I think when you see people who inspire you, like tell them. It's like,
And
you're right.
And that's exactly my point, Natalie. That's why I wanted us to just pinpoint it again to listeners out there. Even if you're not a jewelry maker or you don't consider yourself an artist or whatever it is, like look at what happened, what opened up for Natalie, because all Natalie did, right? And this is what I love about you, my love, is you noticed what you loved. You noticed something that made your eyes open, right? And you, having no idea who this dude was, walked straight over to him, right? And so
Yeah,
often in life, we'll walk down the street, something will catch our attention, but we
yeah,
don't follow through. We don't follow
yeah,
up. And look at everything that opened up. You would not
yeah.
be, you would not have had all those experiences if it hadn't been from the very, very brief moment where part of your heart went, hey, have you checked out that guy? you know,
Yeah, it's just
sliding door
amazing.
moment.
It really is. And even when I met up with him in New York as mates, I was like, hey, let's just hang. I wasn't thinking in a million years that it would lead to that. I was just thought he was great. And, he was very forthcoming and said, you know what, you've got this exhibition going on. I'm going to bring, the president of Pantone to meet you. And you know what? It's just so interesting because I didn't get a single stockist, but I got Pantone,
Right.
which is a global name. And like, I will always be proud of that collaboration. That will always be really up there with my experiences. And they were so amazing to work with. And being at that event was just felt so special, like being part of that launch.
Of course. And again, like that thing of like, like you said, you thought your dream was to be,
Yeah,
in a specific boutique, whatever,
yeah,
whatever.
couldn't happen.
Didn't happen, right? But also, all you knew is that you knew you loved your brand, you knew you loved what you love to create, you knew why you were creating it, you were devoted to that, right? And then, in whatever way it was going to come, life was going to come in and surprise you, you were open to it. But
Yeah,
again, you walked over to that man with no attachment other than to tell him he
yeah,
looked great.
yeah,
And but this is so important because so often in life, right? We can get so stuck by our limited beliefs, right? We can be like, oh, but that shop didn't want my brand, so then blah, blah,
yeah.
blah, right? But look what happened because you allowed yourself to be surprised and delighted by a man who looked like a concept store and you walked straight over to him with no other intention, literally zero attachment to outcome
Yeah,
other than saying, hey, you look awesome.
yeah.
And then look what happens, right? And I know
Yeah.
you've done that over and over and over again in your
Yes, I
life in many
have.
different, and so have I. But this is such a potent point for listeners out there. It's not just that you're great at what you do or you love what you do. Like you said, you have to be out there. You have to take what could be
Yeah.
a risk, but but look, opportunities, how something shows up and where it shows up could be from anywhere, any place. There are no limits, only the ones you place in your own head.
There is definitely no limits. Like, it was like, for an unknown brand to get the Met Gala, there's not many celebrities that have won an unknown brand. But Grimes, one of the things I love about her is she will literally wear some pixie ear cuffs from Etsy next to an Iris Van Herpen dress. I'm so here for that because why not? Like, why does it have to be Cartier or like whoever? I think that's way more interesting. But I was very lucky because not every celebrity will. Do you know what I mean? I think it has to be the right one. But as I said, it's all about alignment. Like, arguably, Pantone's bigger than getting a shot, but that was just aligned. But all the shops said no. I
Exactly.
have feedback all the time, like my stuff's too masculine or it's too this and it's too that. And like it just did not land. I mean, I lost a lot of money trying to get into wholesale. A
Oh,
lot. I mean, luckily, like I think money's energy and it comes back, in different ways, like it really is. And it flowed in from like other things. But like, I mean, I think now people are obviously realizing who are starting out that wholesale's really not the way forward. But obviously, like then, I think when I first started a brand, it was the traditional route. It wasn't just me. It was like the goal is to get into Dover Street Market or Selfridges, like universally. I think we all thought that was the way forward. But I think building community through events and collaborations is like obviously where my heart lies now, and obviously like more of the future. And I think like when a brand is so personal, it does shine more when the founder is there to explain, like the story and to like be there and to present it. I just think it lands a lot better. And when I've done everything in person, it's been a lot more successful. Yeah.
100%, 100%. And I love all of that. But yeah, I keep going back to that moment in time. But it's such an important factor because again, like you mentioned, you had a lot of rejection at that point,
Yeah.
so you could have attached yourself to the sense of
Yeah.
identity that, well, I've lost all this money, so
Yeah.
that's a failure. These people that I thought was the goal, well, they said no, so then that's evidence that my brand is failing or I'm failing. You could have been in Italy and not have the confidence in
Yeah.
yourself, even because
Absolutely.
we're human beings, right? You could have, but
Yeah.
you didn't for whatever reason. For whatever reason, you walked straight over to that dude, right? And like again, that just says everything about you, Natalie, all the way back full circle to moment in Devon where you're 5 years old and you're drawing your
Yeah.
heart out, even if no one else, I mean, I know your family supported you and all of that, but
Yeah.
even if no one else in your immediate surrounding, your friends, your family were doing what you wanted to be
No.
doing, so beautiful. I also want to briefly say, I know we're coming up to our hour, but I just
Yeah.
want to briefly share, which I also loved. So remember, you and I met, and then literally 4 days later, I met up with a mutual friend of ours, Rebecca, and
Yeah.
I'm sitting there talking to her, and all of a sudden, I look at her necklace, and I'm like, "That's a Natalie necklace!" And
Yeah.
then listeners out there, so I went from not knowing who Natalie was at all to a few days later, randomly meeting Rebecca, who's a friend of mine. Turns out Rebecca also knows Natalie because she responded, "Yeah, this is Natalie, my really good friend's necklace." And now we're sitting here today, and as I told you, I read your bio, and it turns out you've done a show with Sarah
Regensburger, yeah.
Regensburger, who's been a client of mine coming to a lot of my classes for a long time. And she also went on my magical Scotland castle retreat. And you knew about this retreat. So again, I'm
Good.
just sharing this, because it's fun for me and Natalie, but with the listeners out there, we are so interconnected, so interconnected. And when we start to really fully step into everything that we believe in and take action on, even with no idea where it's going to lead, doing none of it with the only attachment to the devotion of it, the love of it, right? Like, look at what opens up. So just absolutely amazing. Natalie, I want to ask you a question that I ask everyone who comes on. As you look back over your life, from that being 5 years old, winning that first competition in Devon, all the way through all of the incredible experiences, the high highs and the low lows, the valleys, the peak mountaintops of your life. If you had just one or two soul messages for humanity, what would it be?
Soul messages for humanity. One would definitely be think about what you leave behind. Definitely, definitely. And one would just be like, do everything in alignment. One thing I've learned like the hard way, it's like if it's not aligned, it just doesn't work. You can push and push and push and push, and it just doesn't. It wastes a lot of money, it wastes a lot of time. If you find things that are aligned, they just flow a lot easier, for sure. So that would be like my second one. Just do everything in alignment. Yeah.
That's absolutely perfect and a perfect way to conclude our session today. I know that we didn't get around to absolutely everything,
Oh,
but
that's fine.
how could we in an hour? Natalie, it's been such a joy to have you here. Obviously, I'll put all your links in the snow. No, not the snow, the show notes. But also, right now, tell listeners what is the best way for listeners to find you out there?
Instagram, like I always respond to DMs. So at Capsule 11, if you want to find me. And you can see a lot more of the journey on the page.
Absolutely amazing. Natalie, please stay on the line. And to listeners, it's been such a joy. And I hope you're feeling as inspired as I do from this beautiful conversation with Natalie Benmayor. Thank you. Thank you.